What if I told you that the 4 letters nailed above Jesus' head on the cross contain a secret so profound, so revolutionary, that it could shatter everything you think you know about Christianity, about God, about your own divine nature? And what if I told you that this secret has been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years, whispered in the ancient languages of Hebrew and Latin, encoded in the very words that Pilate himself ordered to be written, not knowing that he was inscribing the greatest mystical truth ever revealed to humanity? And what if I told you that when you understand what INRI really means, not just the surface translation they teach you in Sunday school, but the deep mystical reality that these letters point to, your entire relationship with the divine will never be the same again? You see, my friend, as you sit there watching this, perhaps questioning, perhaps seeking, perhaps feeling that gnawing emptiness that no amount of religious ritual seems to fill, you are about to discover why the institutional church has spent centuries keeping you from the real meaning of these 4 letters. Because when you truly understand what was written above Jesus' head, you realize that you don't need them. You don't need their buildings, their hierarchies, their guilt, their control, because the truth written above the cross points not to Jesus as separate from you, but to the divine consciousness that flows through Jesus, through you, through every soul that has ever drawn breath on this earth. Let me take you on a journey that begins in the dusty streets of first-century Jerusalem, where a Roman governor named Pontius Pilate, perhaps driven by forces he didn't understand, ordered a sign to be placed above the tortured body of a Jewish mystic whose teachings had threatened the very foundations of religious and political power. And on this sign, in 3 languages, Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, were written 4 letters that would echo through eternity: INRI. And while the crowd saw only mockery, while the priests saw only blasphemy, while the disciples saw only tragedy, something far more profound was being written into the fabric of reality itself. The traditional interpretation, the one they teach you in church, tells you that INRI stands for Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judiorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, and they present this as Pilate's cruel joke, his way of mocking both Jesus and the Jewish people. But what if I told you that this interpretation, while historically accurate on the surface, is like looking at the ocean and seeing only the waves, missing the vast depths that lie beneath? Because when you dive deeper into the mystical traditions, when you explore the Kabbalistic meanings, when you understand the esoteric teachings that Jesus himself would have known, a completely different picture emerges, one that transforms INRI from a historical footnote into a roadmap for spiritual awakening. In the Hebrew mystical tradition, each letter carries profound meaning, and when we look at the Hebrew version of what was written above Jesus' head, we find Yeshua Hanazri V'Melech HaYehudim. And if you take the first letters of these Hebrew words, you get YHVH, the sacred tetragrammaton, the unpronounceable name of God, and suddenly we begin to see that what appeared to be mockery was actually the universe's way of declaring that the divine name itself was being crucified, that God was experiencing human suffering, that the infinite was touching the finite in the most profound way possible. But there's more, so much more, because in the mystical Christian tradition, INRI has been understood to contain layer upon layer of meaning, and one of the most powerful interpretations comes from the Latin phrase Igne natura renovatur integra, which means, by fire, nature is renewed whole. And when you meditate on these words, when you let them sink into your soul, you begin to understand that the cross wasn't just about one man's sacrifice, but about the alchemical transformation that happens when the fire of divine love meets the lead of human consciousness and transmutes it into gold. Think about it. Right now, as you listen to these words, can you feel that fire stirring within you, that divine spark that no amount of religious conditioning has been able to extinguish? Because that fire, my friend, is the same fire that burned in Jesus, the same fire that burns in every mystic, every saint, every person who has ever had a moment of genuine spiritual awakening. And INRI is pointing you toward that fire, telling you that your nature, your very essence, can be renewed, can be made whole, can be transformed from the inside out. And if you're finding this perspective revolutionary, If it's challenging everything you've been taught about Christianity, then I invite you to like this video, because we're just getting started, and I want to know that there are others out there who are ready to go beyond the surface, who are hungry for the deeper truths that have been hidden beneath centuries of institutional interpretation. But let's go even deeper, because in the Rosicrucian tradition, INRI is understood as in nobis regnat Jesus, meaning in us reigns Jesus, and this interpretation shatters the entire foundation of external religious authority, because it's saying that the Christ consciousness, the divine awareness that Jesus embodied, doesn't reign from some distant throne in heaven, but from within your own heart, within your own being, within the very core of who you are right now as you listen to these words. This is why the institutional church has always been uncomfortable with mysticism, why they've persecuted mystics throughout history, why they prefer you to look outside yourself for salvation rather than within. Because when you realize that the kingdom of heaven is within you, when you understand that Christ consciousness is your birthright, not something you need to earn or be granted by religious authorities, then you become dangerous to systems of control. You become a free soul. You become what Jesus actually intended his followers to be. And here's where it gets even more profound, because when we look at the original Aramaic, the language that Jesus himself spoke, we find layers of meaning that have been lost in translation. And in Aramaic mysticism, the cross itself represents the intersection of the horizontal plane of human existence with the vertical plane of divine consciousness. And INRI marks the point where these two dimensions meet, where heaven touches earth, where the infinite enters the finite, where God experiences what it means to be human, and human discovers what it means to be divine. Close your eyes for a moment, if you're in a place where you can do so safely, and imagine yourself standing at the foot of that cross 2,000 years ago, not as a passive observer, but as a participant in this cosmic drama, and feel the weight of those 4 letters hanging above you, INRI, and let yourself sink into the realization that this moment isn't just about Jesus. It's about you. It's about every soul that has ever struggled with suffering, with meaning, with the seeming separation between human and divine. Now open your eyes and let me share with you another layer of this mystery. Because in the Gnostic traditions, those early Christian mystics who were declared heretical by the institutional church, INRI was understood as pointing to the divine spark that exists within every human being, the part of you that has never been separate from God, never been fallen, never been in need of external salvation. Because it is salvation. It is the Christ consciousness itself, waiting to be awakened, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be embodied in your daily life. This is why Jesus said, "Is it not written in your law, I said, you are gods," quoting from Psalm 82. Because he wasn't speaking metaphorically, he wasn't using poetic language, he was pointing to the literal truth of your divine nature. And INRI is the sign that confirms this truth, the cosmic declaration that divinity and humanity are not separate, that God and you are not separate, that the consciousness that looked out through Jesus' eyes is the same consciousness that looks out through your eyes right now. And if this is resonating with you, if you're feeling that recognition, that remembering of who you really are, then please subscribe to this channel, because we're going to continue exploring these hidden truths, these mystical teachings that can transform your understanding of spirituality, of yourself, of your relationship with the divine. And I want to make sure you don't miss any of these revelations. But let's continue our journey into the depths of INRI, because there's yet another interpretation that comes from the alchemical tradition, where these 4 letters represent the 4 elements: ignis, fire; natura, earth; renovator, air; integra, water. And this points to the alchemical work that happens within every soul that seeks genuine transformation. Because just as the alchemists sought to transform base metals into gold, the spiritual path is about transforming the base metal of ego consciousness into the gold of Christ consciousness. And this transformation happens through the integration of all 4 elements within your being. Fire represents the passion for truth, the divine love that burns away everything that is not real. And you can feel this fire right now as you listen to these words. Can't you? That stirring in your chest. That recognition that there's something more than what you've been told. Something deeper than the surface interpretations you've been fed. Earth represents the grounding, the embodiment, The understanding that spirituality isn't about escaping the world, but about bringing heaven to earth, about living as a divine being in human form, about finding God not in some distant realm, but in the very flesh and blood and breath of your daily existence. Air represents the mind, the understanding, the wisdom that comes when you begin to see through the illusions that have kept you trapped in small thinking, limited beliefs, fear-based religions that tell you that you're separate from God, separate from love, separate from your own divine nature. Water represents the emotions, the flow, the surrender that happens when you stop trying to control your spiritual journey and allow yourself to be carried by the current of divine grace. When you trust that the same force that guided Jesus through his ministry, through his crucifixion, through his resurrection, is guiding you through your own death and rebirth, your own transformation from ego to essence. And here's what's truly remarkable about this alchemical understanding of INRI. It's not just pointing to something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's pointing to something that's happening right now, in this moment. As you listen to these words, as you open your heart to possibilities you may have never considered, as you allow yourself to question everything you've been taught about God, about Jesus, about your own spiritual nature. Because the crucifixion isn't just a historical event, it's a mystical process that every awakening soul must go through. The death of the false self, the ego, the small identity that believes it's separate from God, and the resurrection of the true self, the Christ consciousness, the divine awareness that has always been your deepest reality. And when you understand INRI in this way, when you see it as pointing to your own spiritual transformation, then every time you see a cross, every time you encounter these 4 letters, instead of seeing symbols of guilt and sacrifice and separation, you see invitations to awakening, reminders of your own divine nature, calls to embark on your own journey of death and rebirth. Let me share with you a practice that emerges from this understanding, something you can do right now to begin connecting with the deeper meaning of INRI. And as I describe this, allow yourself to participate if you feel called to do so. Because this isn't just intellectual information. This is a living transmission, a way of directly experiencing what these letters point to. Begin by sitting quietly and bringing your attention to your breath, not trying to control it, just noticing the natural rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. And as you breathe in, silently say I, recognizing that this I is not the small ego self, but the divine I am that exists at the core of your being. The same I am that Jesus pointed to when he said, "Before Abraham was I am," the eternal presence that you are beneath all the stories, all the identities, all the roles you play in the world. As you breathe out, silently say N, and let this represent the no that you're saying to everything that is not your true nature. The no to fear, to separation, to the belief that you're anything less than divine. The no to all the conditioning that has kept you trapped in small thinking. The no to the ego's desperate attempts to maintain its illusion of control. On your next inhalation, silently say R, and let this represent resurrection, the awakening that happens when you die to the false self and are reborn into your true nature. The recognition that you are not a human being having a spiritual experience, but a spiritual being having a human experience, and that this human experience is sacred, is divine, is God exploring what it means to be you. On your next exhalation, silently say I again, but this time let it represent integration, the bringing together of your human and divine natures, the understanding that you don't need to choose between being spiritual and being human, because true spirituality is about being fully human, fully alive, fully present to the divine reality that permeates every moment of your existence. Continue this breathing practice for as long as feels right, allowing each breath to deepen your connection to the mystical reality that INRI points to. And notice how this simple practice begins to shift something within you, begins to open you to possibilities you may have never considered, begins to awaken the Christ consciousness that has always been your deepest truth. And as you practice this, as you begin to embody the deeper meaning of INRI, you start to understand why Jesus said, "These things that I do, you will do also, and greater things than these." Because he wasn't speaking to a select few. He wasn't talking about some distant future. He was speaking to you, right now, pointing to the divine potential that exists within every human being, the Christ consciousness that is your birthright, your true nature, your deepest reality. This is why the Gospel of Thomas, one of the earliest Christian texts, quotes Jesus as saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Because he understood that salvation isn't something that happens to you from the outside. It's something that happens through you from the inside. It's the recognition and embodiment of the divine consciousness that you already are. And if you're feeling this truth resonating in your bones, if you're sensing that shift happening within you as you listen to these words, then I want to invite you to share this video, because there are others out there who are hungry for these deeper truths, who are tired of religious platitudes and ready for genuine spiritual awakening, and your sharing might be exactly what they need to hear today. But let's go even deeper into the mystical significance of what was written above Jesus's head, because there's another layer to this mystery that connects INRI to the ancient Hebrew mystical tradition of the Kabbalah. And when you understand this connection, you begin to see that Jesus wasn't just a Jewish rabbi. He was a master of the mystical arts, someone who understood the deepest secrets of the Hebrew tradition and taught them in ways that could be understood by ordinary people. In Kabbalah, there's a concept called the four worlds, four levels of reality that exist simultaneously, from the most dense physical world to the most subtle divine world, and these four worlds correspond to the four letters of INRI, showing us that what was written above the cross wasn't just a historical inscription, but a mystical map of the journey from human consciousness to divine consciousness. The first letter, I, corresponds to the world of Asiya, the world of action, the physical realm where we live our daily lives, where we experience birth and death, pleasure and pain, the world where Jesus walked as a human being, where he felt hunger and thirst, where he experienced the full range of human emotions. And this is where your spiritual journey begins, right here in the physical world, in your actual life, with all its challenges and struggles and imperfections. The N corresponds to the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation, the emotional and psychological realm where we begin to recognize that there's more to reality than what we can see with our physical eyes, where we start to sense the invisible forces that shape our experience, where we begin to understand that our thoughts and emotions have creative power, that we're not just victims of circumstance but participants in the creation of our reality. The R corresponds to the world of Bariah, the world of creation, the mental realm where we begin to understand the underlying patterns and principles that govern existence, where we recognize the divine intelligence that operates through all things, where we start to see ourselves not as separate individuals struggling against the world, but as expressions of the one divine consciousness that is the source and substance of everything that exists. And the final I corresponds to the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation, the divine realm where all separation dissolves, where you recognize that you and God are not two, where the seeker and the sought merge into one undivided reality, where you understand experientially what Jesus meant when he said, "I and the Father are one," not as a claim to exclusive divinity, but as a recognition of the truth that applies to every awakening soul. This is the journey that INRI maps out for you, the path from ordinary human consciousness to the recognition of your divine nature. And it's not a journey that happens once and then you're done. It's a spiraling path that you travel over and over again, each time going deeper, each time understanding more, each time embodying more fully the truth of who you really are. And here's what's truly revolutionary about understanding INRI in this way. It means that every cross you see, every church you pass, every Christian symbol you encounter, instead of reminding you of your sinfulness and separation from God, becomes a reminder of your divine nature, a call to awaken, an invitation to embark on your own journey from human consciousness to Christ consciousness. This is why the mystical traditions have always been seen as dangerous by religious institutions, because when people understand these deeper truths, they no longer need external authorities to tell them how to relate to God. They no longer need to be saved by someone else, because they recognize that the divine consciousness that expressed itself through Jesus is the same consciousness that expresses itself through them. And this understanding completely transforms how you read the Gospels. because instead of seeing them as stories about someone else's relationship with God, you begin to see them as descriptions of your own spiritual journey, your own process of awakening, your own path from identification with the ego to recognition of your divine nature. When Jesus says, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest," he's not speaking as a separate individual offering help from the outside. He's speaking as the Christ consciousness that exists within you, inviting you to rest in your own divine nature, to stop struggling with the ego's endless demands and surrender into the peace that is your birthright. When Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he's not claiming exclusive access to God. He's pointing to the I am presence that you are, the divine consciousness that is the way to truth, that is truth itself, that is the very life force that animates your being right now as you listen to these words. And when Jesus says, "No one comes to the Father except through me," he's not setting up himself as a gatekeeper. He's pointing to the Christ consciousness, the divine awareness that must be awakened within you before you can recognize your oneness with the divine. Because as long as you're identified with the ego, as long as you believe you're separate from God, you cannot enter into the recognition of your divine nature. This is the true meaning of being born again, not a one-time religious conversion, but an ongoing process of dying to the false self and being reborn into your true nature, the Christ consciousness that has always been your deepest reality. And INRI is the signpost that points you toward this transformation, the cosmic declaration that divinity and humanity are meant to be united, not separated. And if you're beginning to see Christianity in a completely new light, if these interpretations are opening up possibilities you've never considered before, then please take a moment to comment below and let me know how this is landing for you, because I want to know that these words are reaching the people who are ready to hear them, who are hungry for the deeper truths that lie beneath the surface of religious doctrine. But there's still more to discover about INRI, because when we look at this inscription through the lens of sacred geometry and numerology, we find even more layers of meaning that point to the profound spiritual truths that were being encoded into this seemingly simple historical inscription. Each letter of INRI corresponds to a number, and when you add up these numbers using the ancient system of gematria, you get totals that correspond to significant spiritual concepts. And while I won't go into all the mathematical details here, what's important to understand is that nothing about what was written above Jesus' head was accidental. Everything was orchestrated by a divine intelligence that wanted to encode the deepest spiritual truths into this moment for those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. The 4 letters also correspond to the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, showing that the Christ consciousness that Jesus embodied is not limited to one culture, one religion, one geographical location, but is a universal principle that can be found in all the world's mystical traditions. From the Christian mystics of medieval Europe to the Sufi saints of the Middle East, from the Hindu sages of ancient India to the Buddhist masters of Tibet, from the indigenous shamans of the Americas to the Taoist sages of China. This is why you find similar teachings about the divine nature of human beings in all these traditions, why the mystics of every culture have pointed to the same fundamental truth, that beneath the surface personality, beneath the ego, beneath all the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, there exists a divine consciousness that is our true nature, our deepest reality, our connection to the infinite. And INRI is pointing you toward this universal truth, this perennial wisdom that transcends all religious boundaries, this recognition that the divine consciousness that expressed itself through Jesus is the same consciousness that has expressed itself through every great spiritual teacher throughout history. And more importantly, it's the same consciousness that wants to express itself through you. This is why Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed," because he understood that the Christ consciousness begins as the tiniest recognition, the smallest opening, the briefest glimpse of your true nature. But once that seed is planted, once you begin to water it with attention and practice and surrender, it grows into something magnificent, something that transforms not just your own life, but the lives of everyone you encounter. And right now, as you listen to these words, that seed is being planted, that recognition is beginning to dawn, that awakening is starting to happen, because you wouldn't be drawn to this information if you weren't ready for it. You wouldn't be resonating with these truths if they weren't already alive within you. waiting to be recognized, waiting to be embodied, waiting to transform your life from the inside out. Let me share with you another practice that emerges from this deeper understanding of INRI, something you can do throughout your day to keep connecting with these truths, to keep awakening to your divine nature, to keep embodying the Christ consciousness that is your birthright. Whenever you see the number 4, whether it's on a clock, on a license plate, in an address, let it remind you of INRI. Let it call you back to the recognition of your divine nature, and take a moment to silently say, I am the divine consciousness expressing itself as this human being, and feel the truth of that statement resonate in your body, in your heart, in your soul. Whenever you see a cross, whether it's on a church, on jewelry, in art, instead of seeing it as a symbol of suffering and sacrifice, see it as a reminder of the intersection of human and divine, the meeting point where your humanity and your divinity come together, and silently affirm, I am both human and divine, and I honor both aspects of my nature. Whenever you encounter the name Jesus, whether you hear it spoken, see it written, or think it yourself, let it remind you not of someone separate from you who lived 2,000 years ago, but of the Christ consciousness that lives within you right now, and silently say, the same Spirit that was in Jesus is in me, and I am awakening to this truth more and more each day. These simple practices might seem small, but they have the power to completely transform your relationship with Christianity, with spirituality, with yourself, because they help you remember throughout your day that you are not separate from the divine, that you are not a sinner in need of salvation, that you are not small and powerless and dependent on external authorities for your spiritual well-being. Instead, you begin to remember that you are a divine being having a human experience, that you are the Christ consciousness embodied in flesh, that you are God exploring what it means to be you. And this remembering changes everything about how you move through the world, how you relate to others, how you understand your purpose and your potential. And here's where the revolutionary nature of this understanding becomes most apparent. Because when you truly grasp what INRI is pointing to, when you embody the truth that you are divine consciousness in human form, you no longer need religious institutions to mediate your relationship with God. You no longer need priests to forgive your sins. You no longer need churches to provide you with spiritual community, because you recognize that every interaction is a spiritual encounter. Every moment is a sacred moment. Every person you meet is another expression of the same divine consciousness that you are. This doesn't mean you can't benefit from spiritual community, from teachers, from practices and traditions, but it means you approach them from a place of empowerment rather than dependency, from recognition of your own divine nature rather than belief in your separation from God, from understanding that you are seeking to remember what you already are rather than trying to become something you're not. And this is exactly what Jesus modeled for us, because if you read the Gospels carefully, you'll notice that he didn't ask people to worship him. He didn't set up elaborate religious institutions. He didn't create complex theological doctrines. Instead, he pointed people back to their own divine nature. He reminded them of their connection to the Father. He invited them to embark on their own journey of spiritual awakening. Follow me, he said, not worship me, because he understood that the path of awakening is something each person must walk for themselves, something that cannot be done for you by someone else, something that requires your own commitment, your own practice, your own willingness to die to the false self and be reborn into your true nature. And INRI is the roadmap for that journey, the mystical instruction manual that was hidden in plain sight above the cross, waiting for those who were ready to see beyond the surface, to dig deeper than the conventional interpretations, to discover the revolutionary truth that changes everything about how you understand yourself and your relationship with the divine. If you're feeling that shift happening within you as you listen to these words, if you're sensing that awakening beginning to stir, then I want to encourage you to subscribe to this channel and ring the notification bell, because we're going to continue exploring these hidden truths, these mystical teachings that can transform your understanding of spirituality and guide you on your own journey of awakening. But before we conclude this exploration of INRI, I want to share with you one final layer of meaning that brings everything we've discussed together into a unified understanding that can serve as a foundation for your ongoing spiritual journey. In the mystical tradition, the cross represents not just the intersection of human and divine, but the axis mundi, the world tree, the cosmic axis around which all of reality revolves, and INRI marks the center point of this axis, the still point where all movement originates, the source from which all creation emerges, the heart of divine consciousness itself. And here's the profound truth that this points to. That same still point, that same source, that same heart of divine consciousness exists within you right now, not as something you need to develop or achieve or earn, but as something you already are, something that has never been absent, something that is the very foundation of your existence. This is why the mystics throughout history have spoken of returning to God, not because God is somewhere else that you need to travel to, but because you need to return to the recognition of what you already are. You need to come back to the awareness of your divine nature that has never actually been lost, only temporarily forgotten. And the forgetting is part of the divine play, part of the cosmic game of hide and seek that consciousness plays with itself, where the infinite pretends to be finite, where God pretends to be separate from itself, where divine consciousness pretends to be human beings who have forgotten their true nature, all for the sheer joy and wonder of remembering, of awakening, of discovering that what you were seeking outside yourself was within you all along. This is the ultimate meaning of INRI, the deepest truth that those 4 letters point to, that you are not separate from God, you are not fallen, you are not in need of external salvation, because you are the very consciousness that is seeking to know itself through your eyes, through your experiences, through your journey of awakening. And when you truly understand this, when you embody this truth, when you live from this recognition, everything changes, because you no longer approach life from a place of lack, of fear, of separation, but from a place of wholeness, of love, of unity with all that is. You begin to see other people not as separate individuals to judge or compete with, but as other expressions of the same divine consciousness that you are, other faces of God, other waves in the same ocean of being, and your heart naturally opens in compassion, in understanding, in unconditional love. You begin to see challenges and difficulties not as punishments or random sufferings, but as opportunities for growth, for deepening, for discovering more of your divine nature, for developing the qualities of wisdom and compassion and strength that allow you to be of greater service to the awakening of consciousness in the world. You begin to see your daily activities not as mundane chores that separate you from spiritual practice, but as opportunities to express your divine nature, to bring heaven to earth, to embody the Christ consciousness in practical, tangible ways that make a difference in the world. And you begin to understand your purpose not as something you need to figure out or discover, but as something that emerges naturally when you live from your divine nature, when you allow the love and wisdom and creativity that are your birthright to flow through you into whatever forms of service and expression feel most authentic and alive. This is the transformation that understanding INRI can catalyze in your life. This is the awakening that those 4 letters are pointing you toward. This is the revolution that happens when you recognize that the kingdom of heaven is not a place you go to after you die, but a state of consciousness you can access right now, in this moment, through the simple recognition of who you really are. And so, my friend, as we come to the end of this exploration, I want to invite you to carry this understanding with you, to let it work within you, to allow it to transform your relationship with yourself, with others, with the divine. Because this is not just information to be understood intellectually. This is a living truth to be embodied, a reality to be lived, a consciousness to be awakened within you. The next time you see those 4 letters, INRI, whether on a cross, in a painting, in a book, or even if you just remember them in your mind, let them serve as a reminder of your divine nature, a call to awakening, an invitation to embody the Christ consciousness that is your birthright, your true nature, your deepest reality. Let them remind you that you are not a human being having a spiritual experience, but a spiritual being having a human experience, and that this human experience is sacred, is divine, is God exploring what it means to be you, and that your awakening to this truth is not just for your own benefit, but for the benefit of all beings, for the healing of the world, for the evolution of consciousness itself. And remember that this awakening is not a destination you arrive at, but a journey you embark on, not a state you achieve once and then maintain forever, but a recognition you return to again and again, each time going deeper, each time understanding more, each time embodying more fully the love and wisdom and compassion that are your true nature. The 4 letters above Jesus' cross were not just a historical inscription. They were a cosmic declaration, a divine invitation, a mystical roadmap that points you toward the greatest discovery you can make, the recognition that you and God are not two, that the seeker and the sought are one, that what you have been looking for outside yourself has been within you all along, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be embodied, waiting to transform your life and the world through you. So take this understanding with you, let it work within you, allow it to guide you on your own journey of awakening, and know that as you do, you are not just transforming your own life, you are participating in the greatest work there is, the awakening of human consciousness to its divine nature, the return of the prodigal son to the Father's house, the recognition that we have never been separate from the love that is the source and substance of all existence. This is what INRI really means. This is the truth that was written above the cross. This is the revolution that awaits your recognition. And if you're ready to embark on this journey, if you're ready to discover who you really are beneath all the stories and identities and roles, if you're ready to awaken to your divine nature and live from that recognition, then the journey begins now, in this moment, with your willingness to see yourself and the world through new eyes, the eyes of love, the eyes of wisdom, the eyes of the Christ consciousness that you are.